Hello, and welcome to Beyond the Trip, a psychedelic therapy podcast with me, Dr. Esme Dark. During this podcast, I'll be bringing you conversations with thought leaders and other inspiring humans, exploring a wide variety of themes relating to the use of psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy in the healing of human distress. Whether you're an aspiring therapist, already a therapist, or just simply interested in the emerging field of psychedelic therapy, then this podcast is for you. Join me for a journey into the psychedelic world. Before we get started, I want to take a moment to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the unceded land on which this podcast is recorded, the Wadawurrung people. I pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging, and I extend that respect to any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander peoples listening today. Hello and welcome to this episode of Beyond the Trip, where I'm joined by two members of the Psychedelic Consultancy, Monica Schweickle and Chris Raine, who co-founded the Psychedelic Consultancy together. Monica Schweickle is a clinical psychologist and MDMA-assisted therapist with over 20 years of experience across diverse mental health settings. She was the first psychologist in the world to provide legal MDMA-assisted therapy to a client with PTSD outside of a clinical trial. Monica is known for her practical and collaborative approach, drawing on her extensive experience in mental health program directorship and development. Her clinical background spans federal and state government mental health services, private practice, veterans and their families, domestic and family violence survivors, and adult survivors of childhood trauma. She is a psychology board-approved supervisor, an experienced trauma therapist, and a yoga and meditation teacher. Chris is a mental health care entrepreneur and an executive dedicated to pioneering innovative treatments for addiction and mental health. He founded Hello Sunday Morning, one of the world's largest online communities supporting recovery from alcohol dependence. And he co-founded the Clean Slate Clinic, a telehealth service that has supported over 3,000 alcohol detoxes across Australia. As a 2024 Kenneth Myer Innovation Fellow, Chris spent 12 months contributing to the establishment of Australia's Psychedelic-Assisted therapy system, helping to enable treatment access for the first 100 patients. He holds an MBA from Oxford University and a Master of Public Administration from Harvard University. He's been recognised as Young Australian of the Year in Queensland and a Westpac Social Change Fellow. We had a great conversation. We talked about their respective and different journeys into the field of psychedelics. We talked about the importance of working with a system to support psychedelic-assisted therapy in Australia. We talked about what they do at the Psychedelic Consultancy and our collective hopes for psychedelic therapy's impact on the wider mental health system. We had a very passionate and, for me, at times emotional conversation around the importance of providing for support for people to come off their antidepressants. And there we talked about the therapeutic modalities that we use in psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy. We mentioned the Maudsley guidelines on de-prescribing, which I've linked in our show notes, along with the contact details for the Psychedelic Consultancy. So without further ado, let's get into it. I hope you enjoy this conversation as much as I did. Hello and welcome to Monica and Chris from the Psychedelic Consultancy. It's so wonderful to have you here. You know, one of the reasons that I started Beyond the Trip podcast was in part to kind of document, I guess, the rollout of psychedelic-assisted therapy in Australia. And that rollout needs many things and many different types of people. We often think about the kind of therapists that are in the room. Monica, you're obviously one of those, but it's not just about that, is it? It's about looking at the systems and the infrastructure that's in place as well. And you have been really key in supporting that infrastructure. So I can't wait to get into some of that today. And yeah, it's really awesome to have you both here. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting us.
That's all right. So Monica, do you want to start by just telling everyone a little bit about your background and what drew you into working in psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy?
Yeah, sure. So I'm a therapist, a trauma therapist, a clinical psychologist, and have been working as a therapist for 20 years. And I've always been interested in how we can support people who still struggle with the legacies of trauma despite engaging in really good psychotherapy, really good supports, and trying kind of everything. So that sort of drew me to look into psychedelic-assisted therapy, particularly when I was working in a role with Department of Veteran Affairs, and I heard about MDMA-assisted therapy in a training that I was doing, and thought the outcomes were really incredible. And when I heard that the type of work, I thought that's something I'd be really interested in doing personally as well. And kind of drew me to follow that and track that, and then sort of moved into a healthcare organization in a leadership role that would be trying to integrate that within their mental health offerings, and was drawn to that role for that. So that kind of drew me to it, really just looking at a pathway for people who are stuck in the after effects of trauma.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's been a lot of sort of building the infrastructure around the work has been really important in order to get it to this point where you can actually treat people and help people.
Absolutely. And we're going to get more into that later, because it's such an important part of what you do and an important thing for any kind of new innovative treatment, right, that needs to go into the space. And I was just thinking back, Monica, to when we met. I was just working this all out today before the podcast, and that was on the very first MAPS training, wasn't it?
Yeah.
In quite a few years ago now, but not that long ago too. Like, if we think about where we are and where we were then, it's lots of exciting developments.
Yeah, it was in 2023. So I think the rescheduling had just happened, and no one really knew what it was going to look like, and we were all sort of wondering. And so that was that was fun, that first training.
It was. And Chris, I met you on the training the following year as well. You joined us for that one.
What a place to meet.
I know. MAPS is bringing us all together. It's great. So do you want to say a little bit, Chris, about your background and what drew you to this work? Because you're coming from a different background to therapeutic direct work, aren't you?
Yeah. So MAPS is bringing us all together in that way. My background before coming into psychedelic-assisted therapy was in, and it remains to be in, mental health innovation. Yeah. So I started a non-profit called Hello Sunday Morning, which was focused on helping people change their relationship with alcohol. And then that led into building a social enterprise, co-founding a social enterprise called Clean Slate Clinic, which support people with home medicated detox for alcohol and other drugs. And then, always been fascinated by drug policy and the intersection between mental health and the drugs that we use. And then, MAPS has always been a guiding light in that. And Rick Doblin has always been a kind of aspiring sort of person that I wanted to get around and understand better. And then so that led me to going and doing a Masters of Public Administration at the Kennedy School, where Rick Doblin did that, and meeting him and thinking about how MDMA is, the medicalization of MDMA is a pathway to future post-prohibition. And at the same time, the regulations were changing in Australia. So I went and did that MPA, came back to Australia, and was really interested in the infrastructure and the pathway to support that work grow in Australia. And then tried for several months, including when I was at MAPS, to get something going, and then met Monica, who was on a similar path and doing it, and sort of supporting the bureaucracy in the back end of this work, and joined forces with Mon to make this more accessible to more health professionals across the country. And it's been a great, we've been working together for 12 months or so, and a little bit over 6 months now. And we've, now helped over 20 psychiatrists become authorized prescribers of psychedelic-assisted therapy and all the accoutrements of things that they need to do around that. And now have our own little PAT clinic as well.
That's fantastic. What a year that you've both had. And it's a really, as I was listening to you introduce yourselves, I was thinking, it makes so much sense that you would come together and do this work, because they've got similar interests, but also different skill sets, right? And we need so many hands when we are rolling out something new and innovative and that has the capacity to really change systems and change the way that we work with mental health, the way we think about human distress. But there's a lot of things that need to be shifted to make that happen, and a lot of bureaucracy and paperwork and back end support as well. So yeah,
it's kind of a cool grassroots movement as well, like we have a community of practice of 50 psychiatrists, a little WhatsApp channel where they're all those that have become APs or are interested in this work, and they're learning. It's not something that they got taught through their medical degree or yet to be really encouraged or supported through the college to do. So it's and it doesn't exist anywhere else in the world, in the way that it does in Australia. And so there isn't, extreme power hierarchies. Everyone's sort of learning from each other on how to do it and sharing knowledge on how to do it well. And that's a very exciting place to be in any form of care. There's a lot of goodwill and a lot of really great community energy.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's so important, isn't it? I think about the two MAPS trainings, the one, Monica, that you and I were on, the first one, has been such a beautiful, supportive kind of group in just that WhatsApp chat that we're in. There's just it goes off every day almost, with people just supporting each other or asking a question. And, it's a really important thing to do, to hold each other up, and this work is amazing and deep, and it requires us to support and hold on one another in a collaborative way, I think. So do you want to share a little bit about the Psychedelic Consultancy and like what you're doing, just for people who, so many listeners in Australia will have heard of you already, I'm sure, but we have people listening from all over the world. So tell us a little bit about that and what you are doing. Monica.
Okay. Which one? So we're doing quite a few things. Probably the core of what we started doing a year ago is helping psychiatrists who want to do this work safely with their own patients in their own communities, but maybe aren't familiar with ethics committees and application processes to the TGA, weren't really sure how to find out how to put it all together, but would be really great clinicians to offer this to their patients, and want to do it safely, want to do it well, needed some guidance. So we support them with the whole process, from considering doing this work to actually writing their first script on the dosing day. So we try and facilitate everything around them to be able to do this safely, confidently, and well with their own patients. So that includes their ethics submission, helping them design their protocol. We do training for both the authorized prescribers and therapists and supervision. And we also connect them with supervisors who can support them in doing the work. And then we assist them with the application process until they're approved. And then once they are approved, then we can help them with the tracking of their patients and ensure all of the different pieces are in place. So with psychedelic-assisted therapy, it's such interesting and life-affirming and rewarding work. It can be incredibly challenging, and it's super important to have the scaffolding around the clinicians doing that work operating really well, so that everyone knows what's happening. People are informed in this new modality, and they can be in their sort of, their best self when they're sitting with the client, and know that all of that other stuff is taken care of and they've tracked it and they're on top of things. There's quite a lot of sort of checks and balances that are needed, like at this early stage of the work. So we kind of help with all of that's needed. And where we notice a gap, we try and look at how we can offer like another service or a way of supporting people with that. Yes. So yeah, in a nutshell, that's what we're doing.
Yeah. And what was it? Yeah, thanks, Monica. And it's such the amount of kind of logistical work that goes into those applications is huge, right? I can imagine for someone who really wants to start in this work, it could feel quite overwhelming. So it's really great that you're supporting psychiatrists and authorized prescribers in that way. What was it that drew you, Monica, into kind of wanting to work in this way? Is it just something that you've always naturally been good at, or is there kind of a deeper reason why supporting the systems and infrastructure is something that has been a passion of yours?
That's a great question. I find that like in most of my roles and jobs that I've had, that's sort of the role I end up taking is like, okay, how do I lift other people up? And that's happened everywhere I've worked. So I sort of, with the psychedelic therapy clinics that I worked for Monarch Mental Health Group before and setting those up, like I learned quite a lot and thought, you know, there's so much that other people need to understand and information that I had and people were seeking it out. So I thought I could help other people to do it well. But I think systems is always something I've been curious in, like, you know, internal systems, but also family systems and then broader systems and how that can support therapists to, you know, do this work sustainably. And we have such an incredible opportunity in Australia that it's just really needs to be done well. And it's just sort of drawn to helping things to flow well so that more people can do this really special work. And then it just kind of, I just learned this is a very specific thing that I seem to be very enthusiastic and passionate about, but kind of have quite a lot of experience now. I think we've helped 22 people get approved, or psychiatrists get approved, or their renewals, and then we've got another sort of 5 to 10 in the pipeline at the moment. So the more we do, the more skills you get around it, and just kind of feeds itself.
Yes, because it's a huge process, right? And I think that, you know, I'm just going to speak for myself, you know, this is as a therapist, you know, I think I did my clinical psychology training in England with Lucy Johnson, who wrote the Power Threat Meaning Framework. She was my teacher. Lucky you. I know, she's amazing, and she was terrifying and amazing all at the same time. Which is really, really fantastic. And I think that the way in which we learned how to formulate an internal system like a human, when you're kind of working as a psychologist, you draw on that, don't you? Like looking at all the different parts and the different things that feed into someone's experience of distress. And actually, it's a really important thing to then look at systems and how they feed into that, but also how the setup of them feeds into what is happening in the world around us. And I think they sort of, I don't know, there's something about psychology that's naturally useful for that as well. Although it's something that a lot of people could find really challenging, including myself. I wouldn't say that I'm great at administration or paperwork personally, but I am good at thinking about systems and how they operate, and I like to do that. I don't think we can effectively work with humans and their distress without thinking about the systems which they exist in.
Yeah,
that's it. And the really amazing thing about that is power threat meaning frameworks is you know, the industrial model of mental health care is about putting someone in a box, you know, it's very square, and you're this or you're that, you've got this diagnosis or that one, and this new model of treatment requires multidisciplinary teams to deliver it, you know, and that's what's been amazing about the TGA making these changes in 2023 is it requires psychologists and psychiatrists and pharmacy to work together in a constellation. And that's a much more circular approach to helping a person. It makes it much harder and more bespoke, and every patient kind of different, you know, while these systems get set up. But in the end, I think it's a better framework to look at human suffering in this way, even though it's more difficult and does require a lot more administrative effort. And, you know, the vision for PAP, I think, is that perhaps other forms of mental health care could be, you know, viewed in this way as well, and people could be supported in this way. And this is really the innovative vanguard towards that future vision.
Yes. Yeah, I completely agree. And, I've talked about this quite a lot on this podcast, but I think, the way that psychedelic-assisted therapy works is not necessarily tied in although people need to have a certain diagnostic label to seek treatment, of course, but that's really only one part and only one small thing that we look at, and actually it really looks at what's the distress underneath that label. Well, that's what Pat does. We all know that, right, in the space. But I think, I really hope that it allows us to start to view more mental health issues in that way. Yeah, I could go on a big tangent about all of that, but and I have in other episodes, so I won't repeat it here. But
we talk about like how the psychedelic therapy, sort of creating the systems around it. But I also think that the more that psychedelic therapy is coming into the system, it's going to change the system and the way that like the teams work. So, like I think like psychedelic therapy patients, like as Chris is saying, like they're getting this really great care, like really collaborative, multidisciplinary, that's like looking at their medical health, psychological health, the medications they're taking, like really reviewing them, tapering them, like thinking about why they're on them. Looking at what their support network's like really being careful and intentional about what we're doing and why. And I think there's even understanding, when we're seeing these treatments have these incredible outcomes for people that have trialed all these other treatments first, and then having like how that teaches you as a mental health professional to think about human distress, and as psychiatrists and some biological psychiatrists that maybe haven't been trained to think maybe about sort of spirituality or somatic therapy, and having to then learn about these things because they're seeing this changes in these patients in front of them. So I think that it's gradually going to hopefully change the system for the better, and that will hopefully help more people do this work.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things other reasons I wanted to start the podcast is hopefully to help people to understand a little bit more about all of those themes, really, as we move out into the clinical use here. It's a lot of kind of community awareness as well that I think is really important.
And even extending out beyond clinical practice too. I think about the way we use drugs as individuals and society, from alcohol to nicotine, caffeine, and the medicalized drugs we have. The coupling of their use with ceremony and protocol and deeper consideration of the way that we use them, I feel like particularly MDMA-assisted therapy is like if you were going to design a way to safely take MDMA, that would be it. Sitting with two therapists and like enormous amount of prep and integration, and that this should be the way that we use all drugs. And this is a model to go. This is in a kind of Western medical model, how we retrofit that kind of ceremony into something that is a new paradigm. And it's very expensive, hard to access for people, and requires diagnoses. But I think as a model of care, it's kind of it's pretty punk rock to to be doing it. Even though it's a lot of paperwork and admin and stuff, it's pretty cool to be doing that.
It does feel DIY some days when you're trying to connect the Bluetooth speakers and the videos and the oh my gosh.
Yes.
Yeah, see, Mon's a punk rocker from way back, so
that's right. I learned this about
suited for the role.
I learned this about you, Monica.
Yeah.
Bluetooth.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I think it really does have the potential to turn the medical model up on its head, and I really hope that is part of what happens. That it kind of really makes us question why we are trying to tie people into these small little boxes when actually being human is so much more complex than that. And I think that Pat really shows us that, but it also shows us how we can really support people to meet with those deeper parts of themselves and to move towards change.
It's an and, I think it's not necessarily an, anti-medical model. In fact, the way this is, come through a medicalized model, I think is a really powerful thing because, even thinking about our clients, a lot of them don't want to be seen just as drug prescribers, and that's what a lot of psychiatrists, we end up going, no, your job is just to write the script, or just give the diagnosis and write the script. And they don't want their life to be like that for the rest of their days. I think they want healing for people. They want people not to need drugs forever, or to use them well. And, and even our co-founder, Joe, is an amazing example of a psychiatrist that thinks about people integratively and thinks about their formulation and their diet and their nutrition, like all these things in a deeper way and thinks about them medically. It's a yes and not throw the industrial medical model out the window. There's a lot of value to it.
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to invite Joe. I hope to have him on another time. I've had the pleasure of working with him with some clients, which is pretty incredible. And one of the trials here down in we worked with some clients that using MDMA-assisted therapy with first responders. And so, yeah, it's a pretty amazing clinician.
Incredible, yes. Jim. One a very unique psychiatrist that has a great vision for psychiatry. Definitely worth an hour and a half conversation with him. Just know your brain's probably going to hurt at the end.
Yes. Yes, indeed. Well, actually, I feel like you're kind of segueing us, Chris, into one of my next questions, which is really about your de-prescribing program pilot. I'm actually just going to let you kind of maybe outline a little bit about what that means. You've already both actually alluded to it, but maybe just explain in a little bit more detail for the people listening that maybe don't understand medical terminology as well. So to kind of just thoughts on, that'd be great.
Yeah. So, I mean, personally, I was on antidepressants for most of my 20s. And was going through a rough patch, was prescribed them. And luckily I was prescribed, luckily I could afford, one that didn't come with severe withdrawal symptoms, but wasn't really reviewed for a long time. The psychologist that I was working with as well never really brought them up. There was sort of this other part of my life. And in Australia, there's 3.9 million Australians that are, prescribed antidepressants, and that rate's going up.
Wow.
And they, as a medicine, the ideal range of their use is sort of 6 to 12 months, according to the clinical guidelines. But half of that 3.9 million people are on them beyond a year. And that's a real challenge. And there's an element of, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, I'll stay on them. But there's a large proportion of people that are prescribed antidepressants that are stuck on them, because when you start to come off them, you can have withdrawals and then I should just stay on them forever. And there's a lot of misinformation, I guess, that only until the last few years there's been a movement and a lot of clinical work being done into developing new antidepressant de-prescribing guidelines and known as the Maudsley de-prescribing guidelines, which show a pathway towards people coming off them in a much slower rate to reduce those withdrawal symptoms that people experience. So there's a new model endorsed by the RACGP, the GP College, a lot of work going into trying to get doctors to change their prescribing patterns, but the infrastructure isn't set up to do it well. So where we came to it from is our clinic has patients that, want to access psychedelic-assisted therapy. Our clients want to provide that for patients. and they need to come off their antidepressants, and ideally not as quickly as they've historically been de-prescribed. So we built this pilot to look at building a program to help patients come off them. Joe was the prescriber to support people, and then having an online group for people to support each other, because it can be quite lonely to come off them.
Yeah.
We put roughly 10 patients through the pilot, learned a lot about the system and the length of time and the complexity around dealing with compounding pharmacy, and where that pilot has evolved to is we want to help patients easily access compounding pharmacy, also help patients with the psychosocial support around the medication reduction. And normally it takes, sort of 6 to 24 months to come off them according to these guidelines. So it's a bit of a journey to go on. And then we also are looking to help train psychologists and GPs in the de-prescribing process as well, especially supporting them as their patients are coming off. So it's a systematic problem. Our vision would be across the system, and there's a number of people working on this problem, and we're all responsible for it, is what if Australia could be one of the first OECD countries to actually reduce rates of prescribing in antidepressants? What kind of system would that look like, where people have the psychosocial support that they need to come on them and then come off them safely, whereas the rest of the OECD countries are just continue to increase their prescribing rates as the first kind of pathway for a person with a mental health challenge. So that's our vision, and where that goes to, we're really open to working in partnership and working with people, but it's a really important one. And you obviously share that mission as they too. It's a challenge.
Yes, this is really an issue that's close to my heart from both a professional and personal level. I couldn't, unfortunately, I've lost count of the amount of clients who I've worked with who've really struggled to come off their antidepressants because of the side effects. And it really, actually, I feel a bit emotional. It's I find it so upsetting that people are just not made aware of how challenging it can be, and that can go in different directions. Some people just think it's fine just to stop their antidepressants, and anybody who's listening to this, absolutely don't do that. You really have to slowly come off them with the guidance of medical professionals and hopefully some psychosocial support like what you're talking about, because otherwise you can have some nasty side effects. You can feel like you're getting worse, right? And that can be really confusing for people. And
yes,
the compounding pharmacy piece is really important, because it's actually really difficult for people to get the amount of medications, isn't it, that they need if they're coming off. They kind of slice their tablet up a little bit, but then that's a half dose. But what if they want even less than that? And one of my dearest friends and colleagues spent many, many years and is very open about this, and will be coming on to talk about it actually, trying to come off mirtazapine, and found it extremely difficult as a clinical psychologist working in mental health. And it was one of the hardest things that he's ever had to do. So, yeah. Monica, I'm sure you've got lots to say about this. I could go on, but I'd like to hear
much.
Yeah.
It's I really I'm sure Chris feels like exactly what that feeling. Your hand was here. I'm like, yes, I have that too. In my clinical psychology training, our sort of neuropsychopharmacology training was antidepressants aren't addictive. Some people get a discontinuation syndrome, but it's not addictive. And so that's what I had kind of in my head, that's a university, a reputable university, and being trained. And then when I started working as a psychedelic-assisted therapist and seeing people sort of tapering off these medications with the kind of advice of just halve it and then halve it again and see how you go, and then halve it and, see how you go, kind of work it out. But there's just seeing how much people really struggle, and the harm that causes in terms of people's meaning making, because they don't have the right information. So there's a sense of, I took my medication again, and how awful I felt stopped. Therefore, my brain's really broken. I'm really broken and I need this medication like a diabetic needs insulin. It's like, actually, that's not true. You're having withdrawal. So I love a coffee. And if I don't have a coffee, I get a headache. It's not because coffee is fixing my headaches. It's because my brain is neuroadapted. So just even people being able to see that that's not a personal failing and just starting to relate to their own emotions differently. So Chris mentioned the peer support, so important, like the sort of group support and hearing a lot of these things are normal and people aren't alone.
Yeah.
So yeah, very, very passionate about this as well.
Yes. And I think, just being able to meet for that peer support and people being able to meet others feels so important. And I think, not to mention when people are trying to come off them, but I think even when people are taking them, not everyone has the side effects explained properly, that it can affect your sex drive and your ability to orgasm, for example, and that's actually a really important part of life, right? And people don't realize that can be really significantly impacted. And I've had many clients who were started in their teens, and unfortunately that number is rising. I read recently that people are being prescribed them younger. And then, that's such a long period of time. By the time you get to adulthood in a developing brain, I really feel quite concerned about those statistics. I didn't realize the general number was still rising, Chris, actually. I'm a bit disheartened to hear that, and hopefully we can start to work on it all together. Let me know how I can help. Yeah.
Well,
I'll send some people your way.
The Maudsley guidelines, I think, were a critical piece in prescribing culture change. The fact that there's now new guidelines that are there in place, and they're quite recent. It's just going to take a bit of time for prescribing behavior to catch up. And to be fair to GPs who prescribe 92% of antidepressant prescriptions, their job's really hard. You have a sort of small amount of time, 15 minutes to see someone, maybe 45-minute mental health thing. You got to have, a solution there for a person. And you're also taking on the clinical risk of that person making a decision to prescribe or not to prescribe. And so you understand how we are in this situation. But it is, I think, to Mon's point, education across health professionals, it's the responsibility of all health professionals to know this, to be able to better help clients and patients. And I think improving the pathways and mechanisms for patients to slowly come on them and then slowly come off them, and with the intention to always be looking to come off them or reduce your dose if and when that's necessary. And I think that also leads to a lot of ultimately healthcare cost savings in terms of PBS cost reductions as well. So it is a systematic challenge. I think, I'm yet to meet, the majority of people. There's a stigma around using them, and there's a desire to come off them if they can. So yeah, hopefully the culture can change over the coming years. Yes,
I hope so too. And I think, I think it's one of those sort of challenges that really is best approached from multiple angles, right? And in a way, the work you're doing in this space is very related to psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy, because, of course, on the trials that I've worked on and in my clinical practice, doing that work, it's the coming off the medication that can be one of the hardest things for people, right? And with trials too, like, you have to stay off your medication for quite long periods of time at the end as well, until the data collection is complete. So, and that's great for some people who really want to, but it can be really challenging for people to come off as well. So I think, is it one of those spaces where PAC can inform and help to shift, but also it needs to be looked at from multiple different angles. So it's really great, Chris, to hear that you're involved in some of those conversations. Yeah. Awesome. And so changing tactics a little bit now, Monica, into, unless there's anything you really want to share that you haven't said so far on the de-prescribing, can we go on to the next section?
Yeah, of course.
So just that this podcast is also all about the therapy part of psychedelic-assisted therapy, and as well as doing all of the work that you do in the background, in the infrastructure and systems change. You're also a psychedelic therapist yourself. And so always love to get a bit nerdy with people and ask kind of what therapeutic modalities that you find really useful for the work that you do, and anything that you really want to share about your practice in that way.
I could talk forever on that. Yeah, I feel very fortunate that I get to, it feels like such a gift to be able to sit with people and be a psychedelic therapist as well as do the things around it. I think in terms of modalities, like if I had to sort of say modalities, I would say internal family systems probably informs a lot of my sort of thinking about what happens in dosing sessions, and in terms of understanding what might be challenging for someone when we're talking about preparation, like what might come up and how they might make meaning out of it. Yeah. And I'm an EMDR consultant, so I'm a big fan of EMDR for just about anything. So I use that a lot for integration, and then also sometimes for preparation. But it's not always needed. Like often the medicine does so much of the work that traditional sort of, although the EMDRs and the DBTs and CBTs, they're not really that applicable, because a lot of it's the person and the medicine and just the therapeutic space, and only really needing to use intervention when someone's stuck or really requiring it in those cases. But I feel very, very fortunate to have worked with a few different co-therapists and authorized prescribers and a few different locations now, Sydney, Melbourne, Newcastle, and learn a lot from all of my dyad partners and the way that they work too. But I think, like as a profession, it's really interesting, like supervising therapists and helping them to find how they can use their existing sort of repertoire of skills. And most people drawn to this work are really interested in trauma and sort of thinking about, maybe less conscious parts of the self and how they might show up in psychedelic therapy. And so how we adapt or modify the way we would normally work with a person to when we're doing psychedelic assisted therapy, and how it's quite different, sort of shifting into PAT mode. So I do quite different things to the normal talk therapy, which feels a lot more sort of defined, whereas as PAT, I think there's a lot of sort of space holding and this idea of sort of almost like a midwife, you're just kind of being with a person a lot of the time as well. So
it's so good. I love this opportunity to hear about this, because I'm not in the dyad, so it's really cool to hear. But and I guess it's making me want to ask questions too, Esme, if that's right.
Sure.
But and maybe as a non therapist, I guess like these are some of the questions I think non-therapists might have, like what's the you have the 3 preparation sessions, and then that goes into the dosing. Like just building on Esme's question, like because the person's in a different state than they are in the preparation. Do you apply the same modalities and thinking, and what are the threads that come through the preparation that come into the dosing that then you can work with, and maybe what would the experience be like if you didn't have the integration, didn't have the preparation, if you were just like thrown into that room with someone, and how does it make a difference to the therapeutic outcome?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I could talk about this for ages as well. I very rarely only do 3 preparation sessions with clients. I usually do a lot more, and they're usually clients that are well known to me or my co-therapist, purely because, like in Australia, these medicines can only be used for people that have quite high levels of distress and often mistrust and don't feel safe in their bodies, don't feel safe with people. And so having that relational safety is really important. So usually I'd see people more than 3 times, but if you would take the sort of person that would be eligible for MDMA-assisted therapy, they have severe chronic PTSD, and just kind of put them in there with people they've never met before, I don't think that would go well. I think that there'd be parts of them that would be resistant to opening up and sitting with whatever arose and being curious about it, making sense of it. And even with psilocybin, I think maybe would heighten anxiety even more. I think people are often a lot less verbal in psilocybin than in MDMA in general. And you're really reliant on that resonance and how they feel in your presence, which I just think it takes a certain amount of time for people's nervous systems to feel comfortable with another human that we haven't been able to speed up or rush or replace with an app yet, hopefully never. But I think there's just a certain amount of time that's needed for people to feel like they can, be a little bit, non-ordinary with you, and maybe say something that's really brings a lot of shame, or they've never shared before, or is really hard to admit even to themselves. So yeah, I think that's really important, like in other types of therapy. But in psychedelic dosing sessions, never going in with a sense of like, I'm going to do some CBT today. That'd be terrible. Like never going in with like, I'm going to do an intervention. Often, people have an intention for the dosing day, and it might be something that you sort of think of some good. In EMDR, we call them cognitive interweaves, or they're like little prompts that, when you're sort of helping someone process a trauma memory, maybe will help them to generate some of their own insights around something that might be keeping them stuck. So, if someone has a lot of shame, you might think of a couple of really good questions if somebody's feeling embarrassed about what they're feeling, for example. And in psychedelic therapy, often you have a bit of a formulation of what parts of them might come up that could create challenges that, not that you need to fix or change that, but how you can help the person meet that in a helpful way, that it becomes learning and like something they can be curious about, that brings them deeper to knowing themselves better, rather than leading them somewhere more directly.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, does that make sense? I've got lots to say, but yeah. Yeah, I love that, what you're sharing there, Monica, because I think something that I think can be really important, is that it's obviously really, we ask people to set intentions, don't we, in psychedelic-assisted therapy, which is different to regular therapy. And very often people will come with maybe a kind of general intention, like, I want to feel less anxious, for example. And then I think my jobs as a therapist is to help them to get a little bit deeper and to say, okay, what's that actually, let's explore what's actually kind of creating your anxiety, and come up with a formulation, which is really a co-created understanding, meaning of distress for that person, or the reasons for distress that that person is experiencing, and then kind of really help them to create an intention that sits a little bit more into, okay, maybe this is to do with your relationship with your mum, or with that trauma that happened to you when you were 5, or something like that. And that people don't always come in with a clear understanding of what that is. And that's why I also really like to know people quite well before I take them through dosing. We're really lucky in Australia that we have that flexibility, right? Like, and on the trials, often if you don't, you have sort of, usually the protocols are actually 3 is a generous amount of preparation sessions. I've seen in some places just 1 or 2, but in the trials that I've involved in Australia, there's always at least 3. In my clinical practice, I like to know people pretty well for all the reasons that Monica just shared, I think. Safety is such a ever-changing thing for a person, right?
Absolutely. And it's I think the interesting thing with this work as well is you know, when you can see the dots there and you can see that the person might be connecting something with something else, but just not jumping in and going, oh, have you thought that that might relate to that, but just sort of waiting, and that there's like this unfolding of layers, and you can see that a person's going to get there, but you have to be very patient, and like the gift of being patient with someone and just trusting like that time will, like they'll actually come to that themselves. And then when they do, it's like, yes, you know,
yeah.
I had that experience on Friday. I was like, oh, it's going to happen. And then it happened. And it's something, it was actually a 5th MDMA session with someone who seen over a number of years, or now a year and a half. And they've spaced them out quite a lot. But, you know, for this person with complex developmental trauma, and it, you know, often you meet clients and you can see where the issues come from, and they know that intellectually, but until they have an experience of it, they have an experience of feeling different, and no amount of talk therapy is going to get them there, and for them to experience themselves differently. And then they just go, oh, that was because of this, and they connect it themselves, and it just dissipates, and something just shifts that doesn't unshift, or, you know, it just continues to grow for them. But I'm aware that as I'm talking about this, unless you've done psychedelic therapy, it may sound really wishy-washy. So let me know if I need to make it sound more sciencey, or say neuroplasticity a few times. Just let me know.
No,
default mode network.
You're fine, Monica. I think it's really important. There's something about the people coming to the felt sense in their body, right, of what it is that you're speaking to, that really it helps them to stay in that place. But also what I find fascinating about this work in terms of the integration is MDMA assisted psychotherapy and psilocybin assisted therapy really unfolds over such a long period of time. You know, you're talking about that person who has spaced out their 5 doses. The space in between is so important. And of course, it's not all going to be what happens in the room, in the therapy room. It's all things that happen outside that person's life, and helping them to kind of work out how they want to be in the world with these new insights too. But I just find it really interesting how long sometimes that can continue for, in a really positive way. People can be kind of having insights many months after the dosing that relate to the thing that they were working on.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think as the way that psychedelic therapy, and having done psychedelic therapy for about, you know, only 2 years, but I think the way it's changed the way that I am as a normal therapist, whatever that means. I'm probably not a normal therapist, but when I'm doing standard therapy without psychedelics, is just how much in traditional talk therapy, I feel like we kind of like rush people, or are trying to sort of, you know, give them some sort of meaning making that like sort of speeds it up, because capitalism and whatever it is, we've only got our 10 Medicare rebates, which is not much, but like being able to give people a lot more space to sort of work out their own answers to things. I think a lot of psychology is very much about sort of doing things to people, and like there's collaboration, but in psychedelic therapy, there's so much more space and sort of trust for people's ability to work through things. I think it's changed the way that I work as well in traditional therapies.
And that's why IFS, I think, is such a good partner for it, because I do feel like the IFS therapy has a similar ethos in terms of the way that it is used in a session. Like you're guiding the person to recognize their parts or to work with the pain, but you're not telling them what's there or suggesting that you know. And I'm often really surprised when I'm using that method with people as to where we go.
Yeah.
Chris, I think like you have some more questions for. Is there something you want to say or ask?
I'm curious about shame, like how often shame for, you know, like parts comes up in or like parts that a patient has felt ashamed about or protective of. Does that come up every single time, or is it, you know, sometimes? Or
Who's that? Did you want Monica? Do you want to answer that? Yeah.
I can answer and then you can answer.
Yeah, we can both answer that probably.
I think in the medicine session, often the shame, the parts that might sort of shame somebody, soften back. And that's kind of what the medicine will do. And then it's the next morning in integration, there can be a little bit of backlash. Like, what do you mean you love yourself? Like, you did this thing and that thing and that thing. And what do you mean you think you're a good person, worthy of love? No, you're not. So there can be, it's almost like a ricochet effect the next day, but then you're working with it, you're talking about it, it's in the field, it's conscious. So it then can be explored and witnessed rather than it's just something that the person feels is just happening to them. There's maybe a bit more of an understanding where it comes from and the role of shame, like how it, where it came from, its story, that part that did that, whose voice it was, how that helped them to cope with life at that point in time. So, but Esme, what are your thoughts?
Yeah. I mean, I agree with all this what you shared there, and I think it can come up and be present in preparation for sure. So people, with psilocybin, for example, psilocybin therapy, we might ask people kind of, is there anything that you really don't want to come up, or that you don't want, that you're worried about will come up in the dosing, to kind of, because sometimes if there is something that they're not mentioning because of shame, then it can come up more strongly. But of course, so we really want to try to support people to be safe and to share. And that's why it's really good to solidly know someone beforehand. But I think, I always say that shame likes to stay in the dark. We all have shame. Well, most people experience shame in some capacity. And if you have empathy, you have shame. So they live together. And shame likes to stay in the dark. And if we turn and shine our light on it together, often it can kind of begin to move and evaporate to become less problematic, at least for people. We're not going to be eradicated, though, and we wouldn't necessarily want to, but it's when it's misplaced into these areas that it doesn't need to stay there anymore. Maybe it was there for a good reason originally, and now it doesn't need to be there anymore. And so that can be a really important part of the work of psychedelic therapy, and as therapists really bearing witness, I guess, to that process.
Good. I think as someone that's accessed a lot of therapy in my time, years and years of different therapists, and I think maybe this is a common experience for a lot of people, is you kind of get good at talking therapy, like you get good at explaining your trauma, and this has happened, and it's like you're in charge, like the ego's in charge of the situation, and it's really, once you get into a loop of that, it's hard to and you get in a pattern of it. So even if you have 10, 20 sessions with people, it's like you're just still on the surface, and the experience that I've had with psychedelics has been, there's a real trusting of the medicine and whatever guidance is there to give over control a little bit. It must, as a therapist, take a much longer time. Well, for hard-headed people like me, it must take a long time to get to that place. Yeah, as opposed to doing, working with medicines, it's like I kind of would feel like, maybe.
Yeah, it's true. I think, I think it is common. I reckon that's a really common experience, Chris, of people being good at therapy, and often people trying to be good at therapy as well. By the way, like clients that come in and think they have to be doing this right, But medicine work is a whole different thing. It just takes you into that altered state where the parts do often give people space to access more of what's actually underneath.
And you have so much more time.
More time put your headphones on and really think about.
Yeah, totally. Wow, this is great. I could keep going on all of this. I'm mindful that we're kind of getting towards the hour.
definitely the converted choir, aren't we? We need to have some dissenting voices.
I know. We should. But I mean, I actually,
Should we?
The person who I was talking about before, who's coming on
skeptical.
the podcast. Yeah, I think so. I think the person who I was talking about before, who's a friend and colleague from the UK, is going to come on, and she actually doesn't know much at all about psychedelic therapy, and has been skeptical, but doesn't have the knowledge. So we're going to have a conversation live, or we're going to record it about what it is and have a bit of a debate. So I look forward to that.
We should have there's a handful of psychiatrists that do you think that this moved too quickly with the TGA? And have some valid points around good practice. I think it'd be kind of cool to hear their perspective.
Yeah. Definitely. I think so too. I think, this work really does teach us the importance of being slow, doesn't it? A slow rollout too. And, while some people think it's been quick, it hasn't been as quick as it could have been, right? Like it actually has, because the process is so complex for people. It has rolled out in a way that's been slower than I had originally imagined, which I think is good, actually.
Going back to sort of come back to the surface of the regulation and the system.
Yes.
The thing that, that worries me about what's happening in the US and with kind of FDA approvals is them coming through and being regulated like any other drug, and I think the thing that we are extremely lucky to have the regulator in Australia that we have that has set the system up in a much more the system that we had was not set up to do what it's doing now. Like having the HREC approvals and yet they took the chance to do it, and it's happening, and now the system is adapting. It would be good to see this system of a required multidisciplinary approach, a considered protocol, a really in-depth training, that happening forward in other countries. And my fear is that with other regulators just approving the medicines in the way they are, that it will be much more industrial. And I think it's trying to find a balance with that. That's very difficult. To maintain, I think, the essence of what value it brings.
Absolutely. Well, you're kind of segueing into one of my other questions, really, which is, which is kind of related. Like, what do you think what kind of systems do you think need to shift to really accommodate this new model, Chris? Like, in terms of, you're working a lot with the systems around it, and there's a lot of things that are really good. What would you hope will happen in the future, and what would you like to see shift and change to help us roll this out even more effectively and maybe more cost effectively as well?
Well, the payers is critical in Australia and abroad. So lucky to have a health insurer in Medibank, even though it's constrained in many ways to invest in this area, and DVA as well. And seeing more payers come on board, whether they pay for the whole thing or partial or whatever, but it's very very expensive for people to access, as it is, and so that's a critical thing. And I think more will come on board with outcomes published from the ANU registry, and health economic outcomes as well for more patients, and comparing this to traditional approaches to treatment or no treatment at all. So I think those are systematic things that kind of need to happen, and then endorsement by some of the institutions such as the colleges and AMA, and I think it would be great to see endorsement from the Australian government as well. That I think we are leading the world in, particularly with MDMA-assisted therapy, and I think it's a great model that we could export abroad in terms of how it's regulated. So that would be a cool vision, I think, for our work beyond, in the next few years.
Yes. Oh, that sounds really great. And I know you hear so often, how do we make it cheaper? But actually, how do we make it more cost effective for the people accessing it so it's not as expensive for them, I think is a more important question, really, rather than stripping back the therapy or how, the number of people in the room, for example, or something like that. I think actually let's look at what we've got here, which is really best practice and what's been shown to be effective in the trials, and then look at how we support, how we bring more payers on board. That's how I feel anyway. Yeah. And the DVA is the Department of Veteran Affairs, for any non-Australians listening who are also are funding some of these treatments for their veterans.
Yeah, and giving people more patients agency too. Like I saw a psychiatrist for psychoanalysis for a year, and hit the Medicare safety net very early on into that. So I would have, cost myself and the system, probably tens of thousands of dollars in that treatment. And if I had the agency to go, okay, I could do that, or I could have done, psychedelic-assisted therapy over a period of 3 months and like did it into perhaps an integration, probably about the same price, I think. And I definitely would have done that for sure.
And that's why we need the health economics perspective on this, I think. And I really, it's not my area of expertise, but it is other people's area of expertise. And that's where we need to bring those people in to look at that. What actually is it costing, and versus, say, psychiatric inpatient treatment, which is extremely expensive and often quite distressing for people as well in the aftermath, which can then mean for needing a lot of extra psychological support even once they're out of hospital, for some people too. So yes, it's a complex question.
I've even thought of how we even this calendar year of Medicare funding, like who decides that a mental illness is like calendar year based? Like, where did that come from? Like, why can it not be over like a chunk of years, and you can use it like a fund, like you have your rebate fund, and you can use your Medicare quota for like, I don't know, your lifetime expectancy, or like 5-10 years, and have a more intensive treatment that addresses the underlying causes of things, and rather than this kind of like almost palliative care of like one a month check-ins with a psychologist and same medications you've been on for however long. Like, why is that not possible? So, just thinking about those kinds of things, but also like group therapy as like a way of, I think it's a really underutilized type of therapy in general in mental health. So I do group therapy, love group therapy personally as a client, and get so much out of it. So it's not just about being cost effective, but it's incredibly meaningful and very relevant to what psychedelics bring to the table. And then how do we sort of look at having, we can't sort of have access at the expense of safety. However, could there not be other types of medical practitioners on site? So where you have like a psychiatrist that's writing the script and they do the suitability assessment, but you could have another practitioner on site to do the vital sign monitoring and prescribe medications if needed. And that might lower the cost, make it more accessible in, say, rural areas, regional areas where on-site psychiatry is not going to happen. So I could talk for another hour on ideas, but
yes. We'll have to have you on again. Yeah.
Happy to.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, both of you. Where do people find you? How do people get in touch? If there's any psychiatrists listening, or anyone else that would love to ask you more about your work, where would they reach you?
Probably our website. So www.thepsychedelic-consultancy.com. Probably a good one. We're both on LinkedIn as well. But yeah, probably a website, and you can contact us through that.
Or peridoclinic.com. Yeah,
www.peridoclinic.com.
I'll put both of those in the show notes for everybody, so it's really easy. It's been so lovely to have you. Is there anything else that you want to end on, or anything that you haven't shared that you really want to say before we wrap up today?
No, thanks for having us, Esme. It's been great.
No problem. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. This has been really, really fun chats.
Yes. Hopefully we can have more fun chats together, and I'm sure it'd be lovely to have you on again. And I will be chatting with Joe about having them on too. So
and come back to Lake Macquarie soon. We'll catch up on Wonders Bay again.
I would love that. In fact, actually, post podcast chat, I think I am going to be coming up soon, so I will get in touch.
Great.
All right. I will get a press. All right. Thanks, everybody.
See you guys.
Thanks for listening. If you're interested in following along on the journey with me, check out my Instagram or website details listed in the show notes. And if you enjoyed this episode, please leave a review and share this podcast to help get this important conversation out to more listeners.